My permit is in Santa Ana with Santa Ana Sucker.
Santa Ana Sucker?
I'm a sucker specialist. Yeah.
Sucker specialist. There's a thing that...
Is that gonna stay in these?
Oh, and it might go up front now. Hi everybody, my name is Nick Laurel, and we've got a special show today because we're having a beer with a biologist, namely head of Chambers Group Biology Department, Paul Morrissey. Now the idea here is twofold. We're both going to get at the nature of field biology, what it actually is, rather than research or laboratory biology, and we'll have a beer along the way. Unless you'd prefer wine, Paul.
Oh no. Well, beer is awesome, right? Because you have beer and wine is different. Wine, you are tied to the constraints of the environment, right? So if you're in a Napa Valley and there's a really good year that year, it's because all the conditions were good, right?
Yeah.
And so almost all the wineries put out really good wine.
Yeah.
Whereas beer, it doesn't matter. It's you all have the same ingredients. How do you put them together to make a good beer? It has nothing to do necessarily with the environmental constraints.
I've never heard it said like that.
It wasn't my own, you talk to people, and I don't brew, and there's a lot of respect for these guys that put all this time in it because you get all the same ingredients. It's just, fine tuning.
Is that does bio work like that?
It depends on the job. It's always different. So from a technical standpoint, you want people that are very observant, that can find minute changes in the environment, whether it's a swale or a feature, topography, a plant. You want people that can look at something small, look for something small, but also broaden the field and figure out what's going on in that area, right?
So it's very CSI in that way.
Well, yeah. But that's so if you're doing focus surveys for a particular species, that's where that comes in handy. But that's not what we do. We're consultants. So the flip side of that, you have to have personality, right? You don't want to be the type of person that wants to save all the animals. That's not our job. Our job is to guide clients through the environmental process. So you want someone who can work with people, solve problems, solve issues, and that's a totally different mindset.
Problem solving. What do you mean by problem solving as far as field biology and biology permitting goes?
We had a project where Sunrise, where we had to have butterfly surveys done. You have to do an assessment in 1 week. Well,
And a survey is when you actually are looking for the people or looking for the butterflies. You are surveying the land. It's not survey like people would think of, like Survey Monkey, check A, check B.
Correct. And so I think it was, let's call it 75 miles worth of linear area, 500-foot swath that you have. So there's no way in hell you can get, because there's probably only 20 biologists that had this specific permit. And there's no way that you get all these guys to survey 75 miles in 1 week. There's just no way. We looked at all the numbers of people. We got the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service lists of all the permitted biologists. Math didn't work out. So we proposed to do it by helicopter. Have two guys that are in the helicopter that were pretty much responsible for getting this butterfly listed. Have them do the whole thing. We did it in 2 days, maybe 3.
What is that? Wait. So you're
surveyed
hanging out outside of the
for habitat assessment, right? So you're looking for suitable habitat and areas that you can exclude, but you got to do it the first week, and we got it done in 2 days. How much money did that save the client, right? Compared to having 40 biologists on the ground, if it was possible, 40 biologists on the ground, walking, mapping, collecting the data, then having GIS digitize the data and figuring out what's actually suitable, what's not suitable, so that the next week
hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh yeah, easy.
Yeah. So technology has changed so much over the last 5-10 years, and it's changed basically every industry, and industries are still coming to the change.
Right.
How has it changed bio?
Okay, so for example, most companies use aerial images on their maps. So let's say it's a project site. The agencies want to see what that project site looks like, so they use an aerial image with a shapefile, the boundary of that project site drawn onto that aerial image.
Sure.
Right?
We've all seen that in an RFP where it has the little red part, it has the green part. Right, okay.
Is that aerial image an accurate representation of that project site? So let's say the aerial image was done in 2012. Well, it's 2017 now. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Have conditions changed? Absolutely, they've changed. It's 2012. We've had a drought. The vegetation that showed up in that old aerial might not be what's there today. So you don't want to hold your client to something that's not current, right? You'd have guys flying balloon or those little gliders with the propeller in the back, and they'd shoot aerial images, and that would cost anywhere between $2,000 to $4,000, $5,000, right? Now we can use a drone, and we can capture a accurate, right, current image of what that project site looks like. So let's say you as a client are going to be responsible for impacting riparian vegetation.
What does riparian mean?
Things that like to grow in water, like
Okay.
willows and cattails and wetland-like species. Anything that develops in a stream environment, right?
Okay.
That habitat costs on average about $180,000 to $200,000 an acre. Right?
Jeez.
So if you're the client and you have to remove or modify that habitat, right? You're probably going to mitigate at a higher ratio. So instead of a 1-to-1, you're looking at a 3-to-1. Well, if it's $200,000 an acre, that's a huge amount of money.
So you're saying it would cost $600,000 to mitigate 1 acre.
Right. So there's no net loss of habitat. So if you're not very accurate right, in your collection of data, that's going to cost the client a lot of money.
Huge amount of money.
Huge amount of money.
And this is, of course, always in the end to avoid the loss of exponentially more money, because the reason you do the permitting
Absolutely.
is
especially
to avoid...
if your clients are funded by our tax revenues. I mean, absolutely.
Oh, what was a beer with a biologist has become a beer with two beers with 2 biologists. COO Mike McEntee joins the team.
You get the fancy plastic cup. Cheers.
Head of biology and the head of Chambers Technical, Mike McEntee. Wait, so this is actually a pretty good question for Mike too. This is not a political thing at all, so that's I think important to note. What is realistic to happen to biology, field biology, with some of those projected cuts, potential repeal of the Endangered Species Act? How does all of that affect both biology requirements and the actual doing of biology? What's to come?
I'll go first. Okay. You think of it in terms of this, right? The ESA is in place to...
ESA is the
Endangered Species Act is in place to regulate the rate of development associated with what's going on compared to the ability for flora and fauna to survive, right? The difference for us, for Chambers Group, is this. The state of California has its own ESA.
Really?
We're one of the few states that do.
What would changes to the Clean Water Act mean?
What development can and can't touch, right? So you have certain water bodies that are highly protected. Well, here's a great example. So right now, the state of California, they're looking at moving forward with the development of reservoirs without having been vetted by Congress first. So we don't know what that process is going to be like. There's 4 reservoirs from San Joaquin Valley up north that are going to be developed.
So they're not going to have like
they'll have some kind of regulation, but it's not going to be as stringent as it was.
I think every time there's a change in the political parties, there's discussion. I think it's just the individual dictating things is a different personality and more forward. So I think that's the main thing. But as Paul mentioned earlier, the state regulations mirror a lot of the federal regulations. So permitting may change in terms of your Army Corps permits, but your Fish and Game permitting is going to stay the same. So it might modify a little bit. Outside of California, I could see, if you were in another state, I could see there would be more concern from that side. It takes so long to do anything. I think people would be out of office before anything ever happened. And yeah, I think if you had a client outside of California and they were getting ready to build something,
Power plant.
you might advise them,
Right.
if you can, to sit tight. But then in the grand scheme of things, if you look at what we do and what that cost is relative to the overall project, and do you really want to sit on something and wait before you construct it when the economy is doing well? The cost for what we do is nothing. So I don't think too many clients who are deciding if they want to move forward on a project because of environmental regulations would say, well, let's wait and see what happens. If they've got the funding and they've got something that they've done their homework on that makes sense from an economic standpoint, from a permitting, biology, cultural resource, all the things, the environmental things you need to do, it's negligible.
The question is whether or not we're going to do environmental permitting for, say, $500,000, or do it for maybe wait and then do it for $300,000 on a $10 billion project.
It's a rounding error.
Right.
Yeah, it's a rounding error. It's it's less than 1% of the total project cost. And for a lot of these projects, to get it implemented sooner, they recoup that cost quickly.
And Paul, what do you think is likely to change over the next, say, 3 years?
I think our biggest issue in the next 3 years would be our partnership with the federal government. We've got federal incentives. You've got tax credits for solar, tax credits for wind, right? And these partnerships help us with restoration projects. They help support the back end mitigation that's involved. If that goes away, it's going to be harder for the state to do that type of work, right? So we definitely will see a loss there. But everything else, air quality, Clean Water Act, we have our California Department of Fish and Wildlife, we've got stream bed alteration agreements, we've got things in place that protect California. Smell, drink, repeat. I'm not seeing. Oh, 11.1.
There you
It's like a bottle of wine.
go. Except good.
I hear you.